The recent crop of AI tools is vastly surpassing what we have seen with previous general purpose technologies. Now, of course, there's a wide range of views about the impact of AI on the economy and society at large. And this ranges from dismissal as a nothing burger in one extreme, and also the other extreme that expects essentially the Terminator to pop up anytime now.
So normally when new technology comes along, there's going to be a new task which is created that probably didn't exist before. And so I don't think we know all of those tasks yet. Technology might also destroy tasks. So I think the big thing we learned here is that if you want to understand the impact of AI on employment in different occupations and industries, you have to not only just look at the exposure today, but think about the position of that sector or occupation in the whole economy and how it might be affected by these indirect demand forces through other sectors.
I'm Iñaki Aldasoro, and I'm a senior economist at the Bank for International Settlements.
I'm Sebastian Doerr. I'm an economist at the Bank for International Settlements.
And I'm Louise Egan, speaking from Basel. You're listening to BISness, the podcast from the Bank for International Settlements. Today's episode is all about generative artificial intelligence, the type of AI technology that can produce high-quality text and images and other content. Most people believe Gen AI is going to have a profound impact on our everyday lives and on the global economy. Households and businesses are already adopting it at a remarkable pace in virtually all countries and industries. Millions of people are exploring Gen AI for things like drafting emails or editing images and videos and even music, and a growing number of businesses are incorporating it into their operations. But very little is actually known about how people use Gen AI at home and in their daily routines, or what their attitudes towards it are. We also don't know very much about its impact on jobs and economic output, or on what the implications could be for growth and inflation. Trying to fill in these gaps in our knowledge is the motivation behind recent research at the BIS. Our two guests today are here to tell us about their findings. Iñaki Aldasoro and Sebastian Doerr work in the BIS's Innovation and Digital Economic Unit. Thanks for being here, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
So you recently published two papers that look at AI from very different perspectives. One is a working paper on the economic impact of Gen AI, where you create an economic model to analyze the effects of AI on aggregate output, which is an economy's ability to produce goods and services, and inflation. And the second piece is a BIS Bulletin, which is a shorter format, and that one looks at Gen AI and households. You turn the spotlight onto consumers and ask them what they know about AI and how they feel about it when it comes to their jobs and their lives in general. So two very different angles on the same topic. Are there any points in common among their findings?
So the first thing to note is that AI is what we would call a general purpose technology. Examples of such general purpose technologies include the likes of electricity, the internet, smartphones, and so on. All of which, of course, have had a very profound impact on the economy. Now, the recent crop of AI tools is vastly surpassing what we have seen with previous general purpose technologies, due in part to its remarkable speed of adoption, its ubiquity, and also how easy it is to use it. Now, of course, there's a wide range of views about the impact of AI on the economy and society at large, and this ranges from dismissal as a nothing burger in one extreme, and also the other extreme that expects essentially the Terminator to pop up anytime now. That said, what we note is that there is general agreement on two things. Number one, that the effects of AI on productivity will be positive overall. And number two, that they will differ across occupations. There is evidence already for this in the context of specific jobs, such as programming, translation, and so on, but not much by way of macro evidence or implications. What we do in the paper is build on this idea and construct a measure of exposure to artificial intelligence at the level of occupations and at the level of industries. We feed this information into a state-of-the-art macroeconomic model and then use this as a laboratory to study the effect of artificial intelligence on inflation, on output, and other things. Now, what is key in these models is that the actions that people take today are not just a function of the goals that they have for today or maybe tomorrow. They are critically also a function of what they expect and plan for the future. Think about a firm deciding whether to make or not an investment, whether to hire someone or not, or think about individuals such as ourselves in terms of deciding whether we pursue further education or training. And this is where the paper actually meets the bulletin. In the bulletin, what we try to do is to assess what households know about AI, how they use it, and also importantly, whether they perceive benefits or risks from it.
So let's focus for now on the consumer survey, which I believe is a collaboration with your colleagues at the New York Fed. Why did you reach out to them, Sebastian?
So the New York Fed runs a survey called the Survey of Consumer Expectations. It's a monthly survey, roughly 1,300 households, and it's really, high quality, as good as it gets, I would say. And it's used fairly widely to inform policy, for research. And so the main objective is to collect information on expectations about inflation, income, employment, you name it. And on top of that, it has lots of information on the background of the respondent. So I know your age, your gender, your income, your education, and many other things. And so we have worked with the New York Fed in the past on that survey. So during the COVID pandemic, we tried to understand what are people's concerns about privacy and sharing data, and how has the pandemic affected those. And that went really well. So, we gained great insights, had a few publications with that data. But so this time when we looked at some idea of how households assess the benefits and risks of AI, how they use it, we couldn't find much. So we thought it would be quite, useful to maybe reach out to our colleagues again, create new questions, which we then added to the module of the 2024 February survey. And basically, the answers to those questions are what now underlie the bulletin.
Okay. And one of the main takeaways seems to be that there are big differences, in fact, inequalities in how survey participants respond when they're asked how knowledgeable they are about Gen AI and whether they've used Gen AI tools. The answers seem to vary quite a bit depending on the person's gender, age, their educational level, and their income. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very fair assessment. Indeed, there are substantial differences that we see across the demographic groups that are featured in the survey. For example, use and knowledge of AI tools is considerably larger for men, for people with relatively high levels of income, for people with relatively high levels of education, and also for relatively younger cohorts. And while on average, the respondents in the survey tend to expect AI to bring more benefits than risks for the job prospects, this differs quite substantially as well across demographic groups along similar lines of what I just outlined. So men, higher income, higher education, younger respondents tend to lean more to the positive spectrum, especially with regards to benefits.
Were you surprised by these differences?
By some less, by some more. So I think we have fairly good evidence across different countries that women, for example, use fintech products and services less than men. So we've written a paper on that called the Fintech Gender Gap. And there we find that privacy concerns are one reason for that use in fintech apps. So I think, Gen AI being a technology often used in a financial context probably is something which we somewhat expected. The same goes for the digital divide by age. So if I look at my family, my grandpa uses technology less than my mom, less than me. So I don't think it's too surprising to see that younger generations use Gen AI more than the older ones. What we did not expect to the same extent is that workers with higher educational background expect higher benefits. So one of the big questions or concerns is that Gen AI will differ a bit from previous automation waves. So previously, mostly people in the middle of the skill distribution were affected. So, robots replace manufacturing jobs. Now with Gen AI, because we kind of think Gen AI will be able to reason logically somewhat, it could affect workers which, have higher cognitive abilities. So tasks we actually have to logically reason through certain things. And so actually recent evidence, more empirically in the literature, suggests that if you provide workers with Gen AI, it's not that the ones at the frontier, which are the best at the job, benefit the most. It's rather the ones which are somewhat lagging behind. So, inexperienced new workers benefit a lot. So it wasn't obvious to us that higher education should also mean higher benefits. And I mean, we don't know who is right yet. So it might be that the households and the self-assessment is going to be spot on. Maybe the experts and our models are right. But clearly there's some disconnect here.
Mm-hmm. And was there a similar disconnect when the survey asked participants whether they trust AI and what they think about regulating AI? What did you find there?
Not as much by way of heterogeneity, in the sense that there was a bit more consensus there. Now, many applications of AI tools are going to be are already customer facing. So think about chatbots as a standard application that interact directly with end users. And what we realized when it came to thinking about the design of the survey is that we actually don't know much about what people think about, interacting with a robot and talking to and getting insight, getting feedback, getting advice, medical or otherwise. So we ask households how much they trust AI tools compared to human-operated services for a range of services that include, education and training related to education, issues related to financial services and banking, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Now, luckily for us, I guess, the respondents tend to trust more their fellow humans than they do generative AI tools. But trust in AI tools is particularly low for applications in healthcare and banking, and comparatively high for education, which I think makes a lot of sense. You would be probably less likely to trust generative AI tools when it comes to delivering and interacting around high stakes medical diagnosis, relative to the content of, say, getting a course on the history of Rome or something of that sort. Now, we did not find many differences in trust in generative AI across demographic groups, with one notable exception, and that is that women report significantly lower levels of trust. And this is very much in line with previous findings in work by Sebastian and co-authors that he was mentioning with regards to one of your first questions. Another interesting aspect of trust relates to who is providing the AI tool, because some of these AI tools might be provided by big tech companies, some by government offices or agencies, some by private financial institutions. Now, as I just mentioned, trust in generative AI tools in general is low, but it's particularly low when these tools are provided by big tech companies relative to, say, financial institutions or the government. And this is, again, very much in line with work that Sebastian has done using previous editions of the same survey. A key reason for the low level of trust is concerns about data privacy, and in particular the risk of data breaches and the abuse of customer data for unintended purposes. And indeed, this is what the survey reveals, and it is in line with such concerns that there is broad agreement among the respondents that regulation on AI tools is necessary.
Iñaki mentioned this in 2021 in the first survey. We had a similar pattern where we asked people, how much do you trust different providers to use your data? And back then, big techs also were ranked by far the lowest. And if you look at the ranking back then, today, it hasn't changed much. Although big techs have become, if anything, more important, I would say, the key providers of Gen AI. So I'm not trying to, blame big techs here, but certainly it would help to have users trust that their data is safe when they use Gen AI, which is something which I think hasn't changed over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, privacy is definitely a common thread, a concern that comes up all the time when you're talking about digitalization and AI, and especially in finance. Let's turn to the working paper now, which has more of a macro angle to it. Iñaki, I'll turn to you. Can you quickly summarize the key questions you were trying to answer in that research?
Sure. So as I hinted already at the beginning of our chat, what we set out to do in this paper is to address the macro impact of artificial intelligence, taking as a given that it will affect productivity and taking as a given that it will do so with a differential effect across sectors, across occupations, as we were discussing. Now, the headline finding of the paper is that as a permanent increase in productivity, AI will likely expand the economy's productive capacity and thereby will also expand aggregate supply. People will tend to consume more, firms will tend to invest more, and this will raise aggregate demand. And through higher aggregate demand and higher aggregate supply, output will tend to increase.
So that all sounds like good news. What about the impact on inflation?
Yeah, that's where it becomes a bit more nuanced. What happens to inflation will depend, especially in the near term, on how households and firms, which are the main agents in the model we build, how they anticipate the future gains that may arise from artificial intelligence.
Sebastian, maybe you can expand a little bit on this issue, because household expectations obviously play a really prominent role in your analysis. And if I understand correctly, it matters a lot for inflation whether households expect AI to increase their wages or not. And also, I'm wondering whether the consumer expectations survey that we were just talking about had any influence on this more academic research that you did.
So the as you call it, more academic research predates the survey. But as you rightly point out, expectations matter a lot. And so I'd rather say the paper influences survey questions than the other way around. So why are expectations so important? And Iñaki hinted at it. Basically, when there's AI coming along, it makes me more productive today, which will probably increase my wage. and that's great. But it's not just like a one-off thingy, right? I might be richer in the future, and for firms the same. They might face more demand for goods going forward. And so if you know you have more money tomorrow, or there's going to be more demand for goods tomorrow, I can consume more today, firms will invest more today. And so that expectation about future income and demand basically will determine by how much today the demand for goods and services increases. And the more it increases, the more there will be an inflationary impact. Now, that requires households to expect, to anticipate future developments. So the other extreme would be that we are very short-sighted. I observe today, and that's all I care about. In that case, I consume a little bit more, firms invest a little bit more, but not enough to really increase aggregate demand. And so in that case, what happens is, as Iñaki mentioned, we get more productive, we can produce more in the short term. That will be disinflationary, but demand isn't there yet. So only over time, we'll get the inflationary impact. And so in that sense, when we wrote the paper, we thought, well, this seems like a key mechanism. Let's understand this better. And so part of the questions we had in the survey, we're trying to understand the expectations of households about Gen AI.
In discussions about AI, we always talk about winners and losers, not just AI, to any technological change, really. How does your work inform this discussion?
Yeah, so this is certainly one of the most discussed topics in the current debate. And so I think it helps to frame the discussion by going through the channels through which AI might affect workers going forward. And so one thing we mentioned a few times now is productivity, right? So by making people more productive, we will produce more. There's going to be an increase in demand for workers, for labor. And that normally is good news because it increases wages. The second way, which is also good news, is creating new tasks. So normally when new technology comes along, there's going to be a new task which is created that probably didn't exist before. And so I don't think we know all of those tasks yet, but I guess prompt engineer didn't exist until 2 years ago. That's clearly a new task which requires workers. So that's an increase in labor demand too, which is also by and large good news for us as employees. But, and that's the third point, technology might also destroy tasks, right? So when the ATM came along, bank tellers became obsolete. So that is not necessarily good for workers. It depends a little bit how quickly you can take bank tellers and make them prompt engineers. And, it's an open question how quickly that will happen. But so clearly these three forces and how they interact and how important they are will shape the impact on employment. And the second big question is, okay, so is this happening across the board, or is it going to just affect some tasks, some occupations more than others? So for those reasons, a lot of work now focuses on trying to understand which jobs are at risk from Gen AI, which will be displaced. And so there's a number of papers out there trying to understand this, create indices of exposure of a certain occupation task to Gen AI. And so what our paper kind of taught us was quite interesting here. So of course, some sectors are more exposed than others, and we use this as a starting point for the model. But when we look at what happens in the medium term to demand for employment and output in sectors, it has no correlation whatsoever with initial exposure. So they're completely uncorrelated. And so the reason is by and large demand effect. So what do I mean by this? So, say in one sector, manufacturing, AI might displace some workers if you take everything else as given. At the same time, say in the financial sector, AI makes people more productive, increases the demand, makes firms invest more, consumers demand more, but they will also demand more from manufacturing. And so these second round demand effects are going to be much, much more important than the initial exposure to AI if you let this play out over 10 years. And so I think the big thing we learned here is that if you want to understand the impact of AI on employment in different occupations and industries, you have to not only just look at the exposure today, but think about the position of that sector occupation in the whole economy and how it might be affected by these indirect demand forces through other sectors.
We're almost out of time, so I do have one last question, but an important one. What are the implications for policymakers that you draw from this very important work?
Well, there are a few. So as Sebastian was just discussing, we need to be mindful about the different effects that AI can have across sectors, not just now, but looking into the future. We think that the paper in particular provides a way to essentially discipline the way we think about these issues. At the same time, there is a lot of uncertainty on AI, the effect that it will have, where exactly it will have it. So we should remain basically very humble about the extent of our ignorance. And that is why specific numbers obtained from work such as ours should be taken with a grain of salt. It's more what we provide is more of a framework which is flexible enough for thinking about these issues, for stress testing different assumptions that go into the model, and allowing for the exploration of different inputs, such as, for example, what is the assumed initial impact of AI on aggregate productivity. So in a way, our framework gives you the flexibility to just try different things out in case you're skeptical of any particular type of assumption that goes into the model. Second, there is the issue, of course, of inequality, which was also touched upon a bit in terms of the effect in the labor market. This is a very important issue. It's top of mind for policymakers all over the world, especially with regards to the potential detrimental effects that this may have on the labor force. There is also, of course, an important issue around regulation, and our evidence very strongly suggests that people think this is necessary, and thereby we also need to think seriously about issues of regulation, especially in the context of finance, in particular for people like us who always thinking about this from a financial system angle. We will have a new paper, so shameless self-promotion here. We'll have new material coming out soon on this, hopefully contributing to the discussion. And last but not least, we should also bear in mind that the effect of AI is not written in stone. It's also a function of decisions that we take today, and making AI work for society is a function of these policy choices.
You want to add something, Sebastian?
Just one small thing about inflation. So the survey we have is about the US, and the world isn't necessarily the US. So I think, right, in light of the fact that in our model inflation depends on expectations, there's clearly more we need to do to understand how firms and households expect AI to affect them, not just in the US today, but different countries, and probably in a few years down the road too.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that.
And going as well to firms, so beyond the household sector and thinking about firms as well, because their investments will, to a large extent, dictate the effects that we see on aggregate demand and that we discuss in the context of the model. One last thing to add here is that our work also underscores that there are some sectors that can give you more bang for the buck, so to speak, when it comes to increasing output with a contained impact on inflation. So this can also help guide policy efforts to foster AI adoption in specific sectors.
Well, I think we'll leave it there for now. Thank you, both of you, Iñaki and Sebastian, for the conversation. It's been very enlightening. And thanks, everyone, for listening. You can read the working paper and the bulletin that were discussed in this podcast on our website at BIS.org. You can also subscribe to BISness on iTunes and Spotify, and follow the BIS on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram.